extracted from big law firms after a flurry of executive orders targeting some law firms for investigation. News reports suggest the details of those deals remain murky. Barbara McQuaid is still with us. Barbara, how do you interpret what he just said, these remarks that law firms made agreements with President Trump personally, and if what he's saying is accurate? Do legal questions then arise if those firms made deals either in response to the executive orders, as we were just mentioning, or to avoid being targeted, as we have seen as well, by executive orders? A lot to dig in there.
Yeah, as you know, Richard, we've seen these law firms agree to provide pro bono legal services from anywhere from valued at $40 million to $125 million. And the statements of the agreements are to causes agreed upon by the Trump administration mutually with the law firms. But one of the things we haven't seen from any of these law firm deals is the details. What do these deals actually say? Is there a written contract? One would hope that these lawyers at these great esteemed law firms are putting these deals in writing, because if they're not, I think there is some concern about exactly what it is they've signed up for and what kinds of legal services the Trump administration might require them to do. Is he going to require them to work on defunding of government agencies? Is he going to require them to work on deportation of immigrants? We don't know. But one of the things that I think this is very clear is these really reek of what I saw in my work as extortionate demands. You've done nothing wrong, but I'm going to demand you pay me something in tribute to avoid something worse from happening to your business or your organization. And what I learned in that work is that the extortionist always comes back for more. You think you've paid him off with $10,000 and your building isn't going to be burnt down, but guess what? He comes back next month and now he wants another $10,000. So I don't know that we've seen the end of these things. And as you mentioned, these deals are a little bit murky. And if they're not in writing, that allows Donald Trump to interpret them as he wishes, which is a very dangerous place for him to have them.
This seems like a perfect or imperfect case that you would bring up in an ethics class at Michigan Law. What would you tell students?
Yeah, I would tell them not to negotiate unless they know the terms of what they're doing, and not to negotiate something that they find to be against the rule of law. Some of the things that they are negotiating away were allegations in executive orders that they were violating the law by engaging in certain diversity, equity, and inclusion hiring programs. These programs are not illegal, and so to resolve a dispute based on something you were doing that was not, in fact, illegal, or stripping the security clearance from an individual, or prohibiting you from going into federal buildings, clearly unconstitutional, as we've seen in the four law firms now that have sought legal relief. So I think that when you get in the mud with a pig, as they say, you all end up muddy.
Let's stay in the mud for a moment. Would it be significant if one of the president's personal lawyers operating outside the White House is brokering these pro bono deals that you and I have been talking about?
Yes, and it wouldn't surprise me if that were the case. I'm sure that Donald Trump himself is probably not the one who's on the phone with the leaders of these law firms figuring out exactly what it is they'd want to do. But what thing that's been very interesting to me is the representations that Donald Trump has made about these deals have been different from what some of the law firms have represented about the deals. For example, disparaging comments about the individuals who are named in these executive orders. And so we've yet to see the written contract, if any of these deals. I have to imagine that they are heavy-handed because of the leverage that the president of the United States has over these law firms. I've been stunned with the degree to which they have agreed to these terms. Perhaps their fears are that they will lose clients if they do not comply, but my guess is they're going to lose clients if they do comply. And so better to have a clean conscience and an ethical record. If you'll sell out yourself to Donald Trump, who will you sell me out to if I'm a client?
I was doing several discussions and panels with leading law firms about this very topic before the election, and they were basically thinking through these scenarios. This one did not come up. In the law firms that you've spoken with, were they ready for this development?
I don't know. I think the first ones perhaps were not, but I think as time has gone on and they've seen what's happening in other law firms, shame on them if they're not preparing. They've got to make a decision. Are they going to file a lawsuit? Are they going to work out a deal? Or are they going to just try to ignore it and keep doing business as usual? I think any law firm that has not really thought through that at this stage is not paying attention. But, in the early days, the first law firms to be targeted, I suppose, did not anticipate that this would happen. We heard a lot of threats by Donald Trump when he was running for president about retribution, but I don't think any of us perceived exactly how creative he would get with it.
Barbara McQuade, always a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thank you,
In
Richard.
a rare move, the Trump administration sides with the Biden administration